been trying to conceive for 2 years. You take a pregnancy test every day from 6 days past ovulation moving forward, trying to find that positive. But how frustrating would it be if you weren't able to tell if your pregnancy test was positive or not? Millions of women in the US become pregnant each year. I personally have been lucky enough to carry 2 pregnancies to full term. I was one of those women who had to actively try to get pregnant, so I understand all the frustrations and stressors that come with constantly testing for pregnancy. Out of all of the pregnancy tests available in the United States, pink dye tests are the most accurate and easy to read tests. But let me take the time to explain the different types of tests, how they work, and why pink dye tests are the best to take. According to Mary Doshi in her article, Accuracy of Consumer Performed In-Home Tests for Early Pregnancy Detection, I quote, "Immunological tests for the presence of human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, in urine have become the most commonly used test for the determination of pregnancy." So she's saying that at-home urine pregnancy tests are the most popular. At-home pregnancy tests use anti-HCG antibodies to create a positive test result. There are many different name brands, but there's 2 main types of pregnancy tests on the market today. So first we have the original 2-line test, which always has a control line. The only time you will not have a control line is if the test is malfunctioning, and if that's the case, you're just going to have to take another test. Next to the control line is the test line, and the test line will only show up if you are actually pregnant. Now we have pink dye 2-line tests and blue dye 2-line tests. Pink dye is better, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Next we have digital tests. Digital tests use words rather than lines, so there's no room for user error. It literally either says pregnant or not pregnant. They're just not quite as sensitive as 2-line tests, so I don't recommend them right off the bat. But let's focus on the original 2-line test for now. Pink dye is easier to read and more accurate than blue line tests. Blue dye tests run easily. So as the urine passes through the test and into the reading window, the lines will actually kind of smear with the urine, so it's not a clear picture of if you're pregnant or not. The blue dye tests are also notorious for evap lines, which in the trying to conceive community stands for an evaporation line, which happens when the urine passes through and then dries. It kind of leaves this line there, and then the test can appear to be positive even when it's not. Pink dye tests, however, show up the quickest, both in the amount of time it takes for the line to show up, as well as how far before your missed period you can take a test and still get a positive result. In the article, What's Wrong with Blue Dye Pregnancy Test, an OBGYN Explains, which is written by Abby Berwager-Schreier, and I accessed that on October 20th of this year, OBGYN Dr. Sherry Ross, who works at Providence St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica, California, says that pink dye tests are the most accurate and reliable, as well as easier to interpret. They are the most sensitive and are able to give you a positive result sooner than other tests. And that's coming from an OB herself. But not every woman has a lot of experience with taking pregnancy tests. Some of these women who lack experience with pregnancy tests may argue that blue dye is just as good as pink dye, or the digital tests are the way to go. The tests are technically made the same way, using those anti-HCG antibodies. So some women might say that they have to be just as accurate as each other. Unfortunately, that's not true. Since the blue dye tests do leave a evap line or a gray tint behind with a negative test, they're gonna appear positive even when they're negative. That's just not as accurate as the pink line test, which leaves no evap lines. Some women might say that digital tests are best. They're easy to read, you're either pregnant or you're not, and there's no way to misinterpret the test, which is technically true. However, digital tests are not as sensitive as line tests. According to clearblue.com, which I which I accessed on October 20th of this year. Clear Blue digital tests have a sensitivity of 25 milli-international units, or MIU, per milliliter, whereas First Response Early Response, which is a pink dye 2-line test, has a sensitivity of 6.3 MIU per milliliter, according to Lawrence A. Cole et al. In their article, Sensitivity of Over-the-Counter Pregnancy Tests, Comparison of Utility and Marketing Messages, which I also accessed October 20th of this year. So if I'm trying to find out I'm pregnant and I have a 25 MIU test versus a 6.3 MIU test, I'm going to take the 6.3 MIU test because it's going to be able to tell me a lot sooner that I'm pregnant than the 25 MIU test. It's just a lot more sensitive. Other people will argue money is a problem. Blue dye tests are cheaper, which is simply just not true. You can find 2-line pink dye tests at the dollar store. Walmart actually has a 98-cent test called First Signal, which is my personal favorite. These are the tests I used to find out that I was pregnant with both of my children, and they gave me my first positive results out of all the tests. And I took every test under the sun throughout my 2-week wait, is what they call it. And this First Signal from Walmart was the most accurate. It told me the soonest. You can also buy on Amazon, buy in bulk WANFO tests. There's actually a package for 50 ovulation tests and 20 pregnancy tests, and it's less than $20. So they're actually really cheap. Pink dye tests are the most accurate, and they are very cost effective. Blue dye tests are the fastest way to heartbreak when taking a pregnancy test. It's going to tell you, it could very well tell you you're pregnant even when you're not. Digital tests just take too long to pick up on the HCG. So pink dye tests are so easy to read, and they have the most sensitivity. They're the cheapest on the market, and they're the most preferred amongst those trying to get pregnant. Those who have been in the game for a while, they know pink dye tests are the way to go. So just don't ever let pregnancy tests fool you. Again, stick with pink dye.